Before becoming the colorful character the world knows, SpongeBob was born from something far darker. In 1977, forgotten documents from an oceanic laboratory revealed secret experiments involving life forms extracted from abyssal depths. Among the records, there were references to a porous creature that should not have survived, but it survived and changed everything. The project, funded by a private organization whose name was never revealed, sought to create organisms capable of absorbing marine toxins. But something went wrong. Witnesses reported strange behaviors, spontaneous pulses, vibrations in the water, and a rhythmic sound resembling muffled laughter. Fearful and intrigued, the scientists decided to isolate the specimen in an underground tank. Security reports, obtained decades later, indicated that the creature displayed complex neurological activity far beyond expectations. Instead of reacting like a simple organism, it observed. Its eyes, described as dark cavities, followed every movement in the laboratory. One researcher wrote, "It's not just alive, it's aware, and it seems pleased about it." By the third week of observation, anomalous phenomena began to occur. Equipment failed, tanks vibrated, and lights burst without reason. At first, specialists believed they were dealing with electrical issues, until cameras captured the creature changing shape, assuming almost cartoonish outlines. A scientist wrote, "It's trying to imitate something." Days later, something even more alarming happened. The creature reacted to human voices, approaching the glass and producing rhythmic movements, almost as if it wanted to speak. The behavior led the team to conclude that the organism was learning. But no one understood the origin of such advanced cognition. It was as if it had memory, a memory not from this world. Emergency meetings were held to decide the creature's fate. Some argued for immediate destruction, fearing unknown risks. Others wanted to preserve it as the most significant biological discovery of the century. The indecision did not last long. On the night of June 14th, the containment system completely failed. The tank was empty. The creature had vanished. Search efforts extended for 3 days, sweeping every corridor and conduit of the laboratory. A strong smell of seawater filled the air. Impossible, as the facility was 12 kilometers from the coast. In the analysis room, they found circular marks on the floor, as if something water-soaked had slowly dragged itself across it. Reviewing the logs, they realized the creature had not escaped. It had been exploring. On the afternoon of the third day, cameras captured a blur moving through the ventilation ducts, small, spongy, and with a surprisingly familiar shape. A technician remarked that it looked like a malformed cartoon mascot, but no one laughed. Following management orders, they archived the footage and classified the disappearance as an inconclusive accident. A few months later, the laboratory was shut down without explanation. Equipment was buried, documents destroyed, and employees forced to sign lifelong confidentiality agreements. But rumors persisted. Some former researchers claimed they saw small yellow shapes moving among rocks on isolated beaches, quickly disappearing when observed. The creature was alive and learning about the external world. It was only years later, when artists searched for inspiration for new animated characters, that stories about the living sponge from the abandoned laboratory began circulating quietly. The tale grew into an urban legend, but no one knew its true origin. The creature, now adapted, seemed to have developed a peculiar behavior. It imitated human expressions with disturbing accuracy. In the 1980s, a little-known screenwriter obsessed with maritime stories received an unmarked folder. Inside were copies of reports from the old laboratory and blurred photos of a spongy being, along with notes about playful behavior and childlike imitation. He assumed it was a hoax until he noticed something unsettling. In some images, the creature seemed to smile directly at the camera. The screenwriter began having recurring nightmares. He dreamed of an underwater city filled with crooked houses and exaggerated colors, where marine creatures behaved like distorted humans. At the center of it all was a yellow, square figure with enormous, overly fixed eyes. Upon waking, he smelled salt in the air and heard a shrill laugh echoing somewhere inside his home. Driven by fascination and fear, he turned these dreams into sketches. He drew a friendly character, but for some reason he couldn't avoid certain details. The smile that was too wide, the slightly disproportionate eyes, the tense posture, as if about to burst into something that wasn't exactly humor. Friends called it funny, but he sensed something wrong in those lines. From that point on, dark coincidences began to occur. Whenever he spent too much time working on the character, objects fell on their own, lights flickered, and the sound of rising bubbles, like in an aquarium, echoed from the empty kitchen. One night, he swore he saw, reflected in the window, two enormous eyes staring at him from behind, the reflection of someone who wasn't there. Trying to trace the origin of the reports, the screenwriter found an anonymous contact willing to reveal more details. During a tense meeting in an almost empty cafe, the stranger spoke of the coastal laboratory, the experiment involving porous organisms, and the disappearance incident. Before leaving, he said only one sentence: "It likes attention. The more eyes on it, the stronger it becomes." That phrase became an obsession. The screenwriter began to believe that the character he was creating did not come solely from his imagination. It was as if he were channeling something ancient, born in the deep, something now seeking a stage. With every new drawing, he felt a stronger presence in the room. The muffled laughter no longer came only from dreams. Then came an opportunity, an animation studio looking for original ideas with an underwater theme. The screenwriter presented the concept of the cheerful, sponge-like character. The team loved it. They didn't know that behind that smile were classified documents, persistent nightmares, and a trail of unexplained phenomena linked to the same yellow, porous shape. Internal reports indicate that during early development, strange incidents occurred in the editing rooms. Computers froze only when certain scenes were displayed, tapes were damaged by underwater-like noises, and some animators claimed to hear childlike laughter even when working alone at night. The project continued anyway. Nothing interferes with the potential of a commercial hit. The first episodes were softened for children. Bright colors, light humor, and an almost naive protagonist. But beneath that cheerful layer, unsettling details emerged. Prolonged stares, laughter during moments of silence, odd pauses in dialogue. Casual viewers saw only fun, but more attentive ones reported a subtle discomfort, hard to explain but impossible to ignore. With the show's release and rapid popularity, something curious happened. Reports from children dreaming of the seafloor increased. Some described places similar to the show's fictional city, but darker, distorted, almost decayed. In many of these dreams, the main character appeared motionless, simply watching as if evaluating those who saw him, and choosing with whom to stay longer. With the sudden success, independent researchers began investigating the origin of the concept. Some found disturbing parallels between the character and the old documents about the vanished porous organism. The descriptions matched in detail: unusual elasticity, imitative behavior, and an eerie ability to provoke nervous laughter in anyone who observed it for too long. One of these researchers, a specialist in abyssal biology, analyzed the reports from the coastal laboratory and stated that no known species displayed such complex traits. He suggested the organism might have been the result of mutations caused by extreme pressure in deep-sea trenches, places where light does not exist and evolution follows unpredictable paths. His conclusion was simple: that thing wasn't natural. However, the most disturbing discovery came when audio samples from the old experiments were compared with soundtracks from the early episodes of the animation. The acoustic patterns were similar. The creature from the laboratory emitted a rhythmic noise, a sort of muffled laugh, that when digitally slowed down, sounded dangerously close to the character's exaggerated voice. These findings were quickly silenced. Videos disappeared, researchers' profiles were deleted, and several online archives were erased without explanation. But among specialists, a frightening hypothesis circulated quietly. The original creature hadn't just survived, it had found a way to project its presence through popular culture, hiding behind a mask of innocence. The theory gained strength when a former studio employee reported that during the production of one season, he needed to review a frozen frame. When he enlarged it, he saw something that shouldn't have been there. Behind the animated character, in the shadows of the scene, there was a second pair of eyes, dark, deep, and staring directly at the lens. The frame was immediately discarded. Years passed, but incidents continued to surface. Collectors of the character's merchandise reported hearing sounds coming from the dolls, even when turned off. Visitors to themed aquariums claimed to feel watched when standing near displays decorated with the bright yellow figure. And in various accounts, one pattern remained: laughter that belonged to no one present. Researchers began to suspect that the creature had developed a symbiotic relationship with human attention. The more people watched the show, the more present it seemed to become. Not physically, but in dreams, sensations, and unsettling coincidences. It was as if the creature had found the perfect way to spread without being detected. An unpublished study revealed something even more disturbing. Most of the vivid and intense reports came from people who watched the show for long periods, especially during late-night marathons. These witnesses described nearly identical dreams involving submerged corridors, dark rising water, and the constant presence of someone smiling just behind them. In these dreams, and there were hundreds of similar reports, the character did not behave like in the cartoon. It did not speak, laugh, or move quickly. It simply followed, silently, as if analyzing every gesture of the dreamer. Some claimed that upon waking, they found their mattress damp, as if something soaked in salt water had been beside them for too long. It was only when a retired oceanographer published his memoirs that the final connection emerged. He had taken part in the search for the vanished organism in 1977. According to him, the being was not just an experiment, it was an intruder, something from the deep ocean layers that should never have been explored. His last statement shocked specialists. The creature didn't disappear. It found millions of open doors. After the oceanographer's testimony, independent groups began investigating the deep-sea regions mentioned in the original reports. In discrete expeditions, sensors detected unusual biological signals, rhythmic pulses similar to the breathing movements of a giant spongy organism. The most unsettling findings were the acoustic emissions, which resembled extremely distorted laughter. Autonomous equipment sent to capture images returned with corrupted data. However, the recovered fragments showed square-shaped shadows moving slowly between rocky formations. In some frames, it was possible to distinguish what looked like a rudimentary face, two dark holes, and a vertical slit resembling a smile. Specialists refused to comment officially. Meanwhile, on land, an even more frightening pattern emerged. People who deeply investigated the character's history began reporting increasing phenomena: displaced objects, water leaking down walls, and the sound of wet footsteps during the night. It was as if the original creature had developed a connection with anyone attempting to expose its existence. One of these witnesses, a university professor, wrote in her journal that she felt watery presences following her. She described recurring dreams of a dark version of the fictional underwater city. The buildings were cracked, covered in black slime, and the yellow figure walked beside her in silence, expressionless. In her final entry she wrote, "He doesn't want me to stop. He wants me to see more." At the same time, new documents surfaced. A former studio team member revealed that during the character's creation, the original screenwriter experienced inexplicable episodes, laughing alone, claiming to hear voices coming from the water, and sketching versions of the character with sharp teeth and hollow eyes. These drawings were never released, but were carefully archived until they vanished. The most feared hypothesis began to take shape. The abyssal organism had used the cartoon as a mask, a vehicle to infiltrate the collective imagination. Its exaggeratedly friendly form was only a facade, a way to dilute its true nature. The more people saw it, the stronger its presence became within the human psyche, and possibly beyond it. Parallel investigations uncovered something terrifying. In ancient maritime cultures, there were accounts of porous entities that mimicked human voices to lure fishermen. Descriptions that, despite being thousands of years old, matched the behavior of the modern organism. If these records were accurate, it meant the creature existed long before the laboratory and had merely found a new pathway into the human world. By this point, a direct connection was finally proposed. The creature that disappeared in 1977 and the global phenomenon of the animated series were linked by more than coincidence. The character had been unconsciously shaped by the creature's mental influence. It didn't become an icon by chance, but because the organism wanted to be seen, replicated, remembered. The turning point came when a group of divers recorded deep within an oceanic fissure a silhouette approximately 1 meter tall, square-shaped and motionless, staring directly at the camera. The footage lasted only 3 seconds before failing, but specialists who analyzed it stated that the creature wasn't just looking, it was recognizing who was watching. Today, among researchers and former studio employees, a theory remains hidden behind closed doors. The original creature, the same one that unintentionally inspired the character, never left the ocean. It simply multiplied in a different form, through screens, merchandise, and stories. And for some, the animated version is not just a caricature, but a softened portrait of something still active, alert, and hungry for attention. With the unofficial release of the Fisher footage, acoustic analysis teams began comparing the captured underwater noise with sounds recorded in old seasons of the animation. The result shocked even the skeptics: identical frequencies. This suggested that the sound used in the episodes was not artificially created, but inspired or influenced by the same organism still living in the abyss. Internal reports indicate that screenwriters, for years, mentioned feeling strange creative pressures, as if certain ideas appeared fully formed without logical explanation. Several admitted that some jokes, scenes, and expressions were never consciously planned. "It's like someone placed it in my head," an anonymous artist confessed in a confidential statement. Over time, behavior researchers began noticing a pattern among longtime fans. Many reported feeling an unusual, almost compulsive longing for the character. Specialists suggested that the original creature may have embedded traces of its presence in the human imagination, creating an artificial emotional bond, something beyond ordinary nostalgia. For some, that connection began manifesting physically. There were reports of people finding puddles of salty water in their bedrooms despite living far from the coast. Others heard noises resembling wet footsteps behind closed doors. In certain cases, witnesses claimed to feel a silent presence watching them at night, accompanied by a faint smell of the sea. Studying these cases, researchers revisited the 1977 incident. The most disturbing conclusion was finally admitted. The creature had not simply escaped the laboratory, it had evolved. It developed a form of symbiotic sensitivity with anyone who observed it, using the animated image as an extension of itself, an indirect channel to approach the human world without being confronted. This hypothesis explained why, even decades later, new reports continued to appear. It didn't matter how many times the character was redesigned, modernized, or adapted. the essence remained, as if something deeper, older, influenced its presence. Some specialists called this a cognitive signature. Others used a simpler term, infestation. A former animator revealed something that was never made public. In discarded episodes, the character sometimes stood still for too long, staring directly at the camera, even without instruction. These scenes were deleted immediately. "It felt like he knew he was being watched," wrote the animator, "and it felt like he was looking back." He requested anonymity and left the profession after the incident. As years passed, scholars of the phenomenon reached an uncomfortable conclusion. The creature does not seek to control or attack. It seeks to be seen. The more people observe it, the stronger its presence becomes. Not in the ocean, but in the collective mental field, an entity that does not need a physical form to manifest. All it needs is a screen, a drawn smile, or a curious gaze. That is why some researchers insist the character should not be treated merely as entertainment. There is something behind the layer of humor and color, something that emerged from ancient depths and stayed with us for decades. The being that inspired the animated icon still resides in the ocean, but its influence has spread far beyond anywhere a diver could reach. And so the investigation ends with an unsettling reflection. Perhaps the character's success is not due solely to charisma or creativity. Perhaps, somewhere in the dark waters, the original creature still observes, satisfied, as its image multiplies across the world, because in the end, its intention has been the same since 1977, to be remembered and to never stop being seen.